to make this video as quick as possible. I just want to run through a quick example of the way that I affect sounds within Koala, rather using Koala sounds within AOM. So I'm affecting them with AUV3 plugins. So I'm going to start off, obviously you can see I've got two channels here on AUM. One of them's just the microphone, so don't worry about that one too much. So I'm going to open my Koala, and in here I've just got some standard drum sounds, and then I've sequenced them up into a 4-bar loop that's pretty standard and straightforward. So this is what it looks like, and this is what it sounds like. So what I want to do is then take that very dry drum sound and turn it into something a lot more interesting. So the first thing I want to do with that is, if I look into these samples here, I want to put these on separate channels. So I'm going to go into this one here, I'm going to edit it, and if you see these hi-hats here, I'm going to put those on channel 2. So now we can't hear them because we've only got one instance of Koala, and that's exactly what we want at this stage. And then I'm going to put the snares, put those on channel 3. Now I'm not using the round robin in this one, but I am using that lengthy snare there. So I'm going to change that. That one's on channel 3 now as well. So that has split those off into 3 channels. So now we have individual channels for what is effectively our kick and tom, then a hi-hat, and then a snare. So I'm going to add another channel. I'm going to go to multi-bus audio instance, and then I'm going to stick that one there, and that's going to be my hi-hat. So you can hear that's coming through fine. And then I'll have another one, and then I'm going to create my snare. So again, for housekeeping, I'll move it and keep it close. And then we've got so now we've got all 3 sounds split off into different channels. So what I'd like to do is affect those individually, but also I'm going to put a mix bus so that they all feed into the same place, because I want to affect them individually and as a whole. So I'm going to create this as a mix bus. I'm going to put that one as bus A, then I'm going to change all these sends to send to mix bus A. So now they can have their own individual effects, but they can also come into the master here, which is the way that I want to do it. There's various reasons for that, but specifically, I want to be able to individually affect these, but I want them all to sound like they're consistently solid together. And the way that we do that is by affecting them all as a whole at the end. Obviously, this relates to whatever other program you're using, and it relates to other sounds as well, but I'm focusing on drums because that's the way that I start my production process. So I'll get the drums to a point where I'm happy with and they're kind of bouncing along, and then I'll move on. So this is obviously the first stage of that. Now on the hi-hats, I just want something quite simple. So on the stereo balance, I just want the mid and side balance. I want them pushing towards the sides more. Now you'll notice ultimately, if you're not listening to this in headphones, it just makes them a bit quieter, which is also a kind of a side benefit that I quite like. Ultimately, I don't want particularly loud hi-hats, and that takes care of that for me. Now the second thing I want on my snare is I want to bring in some reverb, and obviously my personal preference is go straight to it. Look, we've got the this is the Altispace reverb, which is, it uses impulse responses, and the impulse response that I'm using is the RE201 springs. So it's the spring reverb tank from a Roland RE201 Space Echo. So that's the sound that this makes, and it sounds like this. So you can hear the dry and the wet sound. And the difference there is it's a very small percentage. If you can see over here, we've got only 5% of the wet signal there. And that's exactly how much I want to mix it in, because then I'm getting the sound that I want. So then to listen to that as a whole. So then I've got the individual elements that I want. I'm going to leave the kick and the tom for the time being. In some other instances, I'll want to process those. I might want to distort the kick and really overdrive it. But for now, I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to move on to the mix bus for the drums. And the first thing I'm going to add is I want transient. Now what the transient does is the bits, effectively, it affects the bits in between the hits and kind of blurs them. And that to kind of, if you think about this as the recording process, if we were recording the drums, you can either record the drums very isolated, where you'd have lots of mics and they'd be close mic'd on individual parts of the drum kit. I don't really like that, because that's not the style of drumming that I want. I like effectively like 1 or 2 mics on a drum kit just pointed straight between the kick and the snare effectively. And then you get a nice bit of bleed where all of the sounds are kind of all together. So you don't get the silence in between the hits, and that's what we're looking to eradicate here. So that's why we've got FAC Transient. Now I'm just gonna, if you have a look through here, there's loads of various different options. To be perfectly honest, the ambience is fine. I just want some effectively drum room ambience. So we'll do it without. So you can hear how the sounds are now merging together more, which is definitely getting to a place where I like. So then the next thing I want to do, I want to put in my particular taste of music. Kind of comes from the 12-bit samplers from the sort of the 90s. So you think, talking about instruments such as the Akai S950, the EMU SB 1200, Akai MPC 60, where they had effectively, you're looking at a 12-bit. So if you see on here, we've got bit depth, so I might put that, go straight to 12. And then I'm going to look at about half of this, so maybe like 22. And then that's going to reduce, it's going to give you like a crunchiness to it. So again, I'll take it off. It gives it that ringing crunch, which is what I'm really after. So we're getting close. This is the, so if you imagine, I've started off with, if I'm talking about sampling a funk break, I've got the original funk stuff. So when the drum was mic'd up, they might have put some spring reverb on it, and the room it was in, it was quite reverby. And then they mic'd it close up. They mic'd it quite loosely, so they got some of the bleed. I've got that from the transient. Then it's going into my 12-bit sampler, so that's the bit juggler. And the last part of this particular jigsaw is I want tape on there. So my personal favorite for this is the quite staggeringly good Chow Tape model. Now, I'll just expand this so you can see what we're doing. So I'll take that back to the beginning. One of the first things that I want to do here, so the stereo, I'm going to change that to mid-side. So that's processing the sounds in a slightly different way, and that's giving you a different feel with the stereo signal. And that's just personal preference. Obviously, you can change it however you want it. Now, if you look down here, I'm not going to put the input gain on at all. I am going to change the output gain because we're going to overdrive this quite a bit. So I'm going to drop it down to, let's say, about 360 will do. I want it 100% wet, so that's there. So then let's go on to the next tab. Filters. I'm not going to want to cut any low off, but I probably am going to want to cut some of the high because I like my drums to be relatively smooth and sitting in the mix. So I don't want lots of the high element. But what I do want coming across to the tape is loads of saturation, because I want it to sound like it's being sent to really, really raw tape. So shall we just have a listen to what that sounds like? So I'll turn that off for now. I'll turn the saturation off. So this is just a little bit of the high cut. So you can see with the gain, that's rounded that off a little bit. and the mid side has changed the stereo dynamics of it a little bit. So now I'm going to put on the saturation, so I'll just turn that bit on. I added a bit of drive there as well. So we might add some compression in a little while if we want a little bit of that. So the best way to figure out, there's lots and lots of articles and it's very worth reading up on what all these things do. But for the time being, the easiest way is if you download this app and you just try each bit and find out what they do, you know, all through the different stages. So here we've got it. We'll try it without any compression. So we put the compression on. How much compression do we want? Let's put loads on and see what that sounds like. So you can see it's pulling all the signal together again. Particularly noticeable in the toms. If you heard the toms in the background, it makes those really kind of swell up. So I'm going to leave that as it is and stick it on a vast amount of compression, just because I particularly like that sound. The attack and release is fine. You can obviously change that as you want it. In the tone again, similarly to the filter, you can decide if you want to round some of the treble off or the bass and whereabouts the frequencies that you want. I'm going to leave that for now because I do that slightly differently with something else. So we're going to move across to this third section here, which is the loss, the degrade and the chew. Now what these do, first of all, if you're working on reel to reel, you have a different quality based on the speed. So if we start down at the bottom, you can see where it says IPS, inches per second, at 30. So 30 inches per second is what it starts at. So we'll listen to that. That's the highest quality. So that's running fastest. It's using up the most tape to get that information. So you're getting a lot of space relatively to put the data on. So we can half that by putting it at 15. Quite broken. Then we can half that again. And then we can half that again. If you reduce it even more than that, so we've taken it down to 1 inch per second, or just over, and you can start to hear it really kind of breaking up. So depending on what effects you're looking for, that might be something that you want. I'm going to keep it on 3.75 because that's fine. Now up here, you can hear the difference that changing the gap in microns and the thickness makes to the sound. Now you know where I said I wasn't going to touch the tone. The reason I'm not going to touch the tone is because this has very much the same effect. So you can change the gap in microns. The bigger the gap, the less resolution you have, so the more grainy and gritty it is. So it tames the high frequencies. I like to do that here because it gets me a more interesting sound. In the degradation, so again, it does exactly what you would imagine it would. So it causes the sound to degrade. And if we press play here, so if we go through these parts here, so if you see the gain at the beginning, in my process, the gain affects first of all the stereo field, and then it tames the signal, so it turns the gain off. Then the filter, I'm going to take a little bit of the high end off. The tape does the saturation and really thickens the sound, and the compression kind of doubles down on that. I leave the tone alone because over here I do the same sort of thing. So what I've done is I've kind of built the sound up and thickened it, and now I want to smooth it off. So this is what these things are doing, the degradation, the loss, and then the chew is an extra effect, and we'll get into that in a second. So we're now at the degradation. With all the way up there, it's a really quite smooth sound, which is lovely because we've got these really brutal drums, and now they've got the thickness, but what they don't have is that abrasive element, which is an excellent little feature, and it's a really nice way of getting that. Now you can see, obviously the amount is relative to the depth, but what the variance does is it introduces that random element of it really breaking up. So you've got your tape's degrading, and as you play the tape over time it wears. This has got the points where it adds in randomness to show how much wear you've got and how degraded your tape is. I like a little bit of broken sound to it, so I move the variance up a little bit, and then the envelope. It's more effective in a subtler way, but the envelope, how much the degradation, where that comes in. So then we go into the chew. Now you hear the chew straight away. So if I turn up the variance to 1, and then I'm going to turn the depth up, and that's going to affect it, and you'll hear how much it affects it. Sorry, I need to put the frequency up as well. So at the moment there's nothing, so here we go. Utterly destroys the sound. So if we turn the depth down and keep the frequency up, so this is, if you want to find this subtly, you're going to bring the frequency down and then the depth down. Again, this is something that might not be all that particularly essential for drums, but it's nice for when you're really looking to decimate the sound. So if we go back to degrade, obviously this last panel here, you've got your wow and flutter. Again, very much depending according to the taste. I don't tend to put it on drums an awful lot. But first of all, so if you go for your flutter, you can sync the flutter. So depending on whether you want it really, really quick or you want it slower. So we've got tape speed to whole note. We've got all these in between. So if we start off with that. If you do it a lot, it brings in a very intense kind of a flanging sound. Which is quite subtle, but obviously when you hear the decay, I'll just do that again. You can hear it kind of wobbling its way at the end. I don't particularly want an awful lot on the drum, so I'll leave that. And then we'll go for wow, do the same, sync to the tape speed. So if you want to see what it really does, stick everything up to a full and you'll see it's doing very extreme things, and that's accompanied by this visual here. So you can see the kind of the variance and the rate. So we bring the rate all the way back down. You can just play with these settings for a second. And we've just about come to a point where I'm quite happy with. So you might have forgotten exactly what this sounds like. Oh, the azimuth, let's just do that. The reason why I didn't touch the azimuth before is because I'm doing mid-side. It only really works because it affects the stereo field. Azimuth will move things around from one side to the other, which can give you a really lovely effect, and it's quite a nice thing to modulate with an LFO, if you wanted to use a Rosetta LFO, that's a cool thing to kind of change the thing around. But ultimately, it's not really something that I would do on drums. So that's the drum sound that we've got there. That's the little stage that we've got. So if I just press play with that, that's where we're at. So let's turn them all off and see what it sounded like at the beginning. And that's basically the way that I do my drum sounds within Koala. And whether you are in AOM rather, but whether you're using iOS, or using Ableton, or whatever else it might be that you're using, there are approximations of these tools if that's the sound that you want. So hopefully that was useful. Thanks for watching.